straight games, and the dead return. I think I'll end with a poem, another one written metrically that would almost disguise itself successfully, metrically and with rhyme. It's called Death Work. I wrote a prose book called Life Work, 2 words, and that's why I picked the title Death Work. Wake when dog whimpers, prick finger, inject insulin, glue teeth in, smoke cigarette, shudder and fret, feed old dog, write syllabic on self-pity, get Boston Globe, drink coffee, eat bagel, read at nervous speed, smoke cigarette, never forget to measure oneself against Job, drag out afternoon, walk dog, drink tea, don't write, turn off light, smoke cigarette, watching sunset, wait for the fucking moon. Nuke Stofers, pace and curse, for solitude support, drink Taylor's port, smoke cigarette, sleep, sweat, nightmare until dog whimpers. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we'll have some questions now, but do we have mics and lights? Or?
Thank you very much.
Thank
Wonderful.
you, Don.
Wonderful.
Thank you for your introduction.
Okay. We can do some questions now for Mr. Hall. Let me just also say that there are some dancers, I think, in the back, and they've also agreed to take questions if you have any for them as well. So we've got mics. I'll do the main here, and we've got mics on either side, too.
So, what happened to your 4-year-old, your inner 4-year-old, after experiencing all this? Oh, sorry. So, in a poem you mentioned you had a 4-year-old inside, and I was wondering how your 4-year-old made it through all this.
I still did not hear, and I'm sorry.
You mentioned that you have a 4-year-old inside, and I was wondering how the 4-year-old did going through super sadness.
My granddaughter.
No, you're like in your personal. In one of your poems, you mentioned you had your own you as a 4-year-old, and you sat by her bed and you waited.
Excuse me?
And it was the one where you said, and if I were perfect.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. I forgot that. I was comparing myself to a 4-year-old who thought that if he were perfect, this is my childish emotion, if he were perfect, if there were nothing wrong with him, maybe then she would not leave me. I mean, that's more or less what I said. And my attitude, is there anything I can do? Can I stand on my head and spit nickels? What can I do to make you feel better, to make you all better? And I will do anything, but nothing I do will ever do any good, finally. But that seemed to me, or I seemed to be feeling like a little child, feeling guilty, wanting to be perfect so that everything would be all right. I'm sorry I couldn't understand or grasp the question. I'll try to do better. Perfect, exactly, yeah.
Okay, over here. In one of your poems called White Apples, I believe it is, you talked about a memory with your father.
Yes.
And we were told in my English class to read a few of your poems, and that was one of them that I read, and I couldn't really understand what the memory was. Or I don't know if you mentioned it in the poem, but could you tell us what it was, or tell me what it was?
That's the poem that I took as the title of my new and selected poems, White Apples and the Taste of Stone. When my father died at 52, and I was 27, and I wrote about him several times, his death and elegy. But just a few weeks after he died in December, this was in January, I woke in the night hearing his voice calling me from outside. It was snowing, and I sat up in bed, and I say this in the poem, I'm paraphrasing the poem, but I was frightened, and frightened to go see the ghost of my father. And I said to myself, if he calls again, I will put on my coat and galoshes. I mean, that's the last line of the poem. I had that poem about imagining, dreaming, that I heard my father's voice and being frightened to go for him. I wrote the poem, I don't know how many times. I know that I published it once in the Times Literary Supplement, and when the poem came out, issue came out, I threw the poem away, tore it up. It was terrible, and there was something false about it. And I worked on it for another 10 or 15, well, I put it away and brought it back over 10 or 15 years. I thought I had it right, and I printed it in another magazine, and when the magazine came out, I looked at it and knew it was not there. And I put it away again. And one morning, I was walking across the lawn of the house where I lived, and a line came into my head, white apples and the taste of stone. And I had no idea where it came from, but I knew exactly that it belonged to this poem. And I went upstairs where I worked and found the poem as I'd written it. And in the middle of the poem, after talking about hearing my father's voice, but before saying I would wait to hear it again, I put in that line, and suddenly the poem came alive for me. And I didn't know why, I didn't know where it had come from, and I still feel that the poem works because of that line, and I still can't tell you why, but I did learn something, I think I learned about its origin. Just a year before Jane was diagnosed with leukemia, Bill Moyers interviewed both of us and made an hour program about, called A Life Together, I guess. And while he was interviewing me, Moyers said, where did that line come from? White apples and the taste of stone. And I said, I don't know. And he said, I think of mortuary or cemetery statuary. And amazing. In back of the house, where I was walking across the lawn, in back of the house was a cemetery. And I had been looking, I'm sure, without knowing I was looking, at stone sculpture. And that line came into my head. There sometimes carved fruit on gravestones and so on. And I have no actual recollection, of course, of seeing it. But I'm sure that Moyers was right, and that's where it came from. And why does it work? I don't really know. It gives a kind of, the language is entirely different from the rest of the language in the poem. And it seems to give a kind of emotional, electrical charge to the poem, which otherwise is so ordinary in its language, so simple and ordinary. But your guess is as good as mine. I often feel that way about poems. When I finish them, someone will read them and find something in them that I never saw. And often, I think it's true. And it pleases me that something came into that poem that I was not aware of. But